It's my joy this morning to bring up for the next world my first son. I welcome Pastor David Oyedepo Jr.
Shiloh 2025 has become one of the most discussed religious gatherings in Nigeria, not only because of its spiritual significance but because of the unfolding internal dynamics within the Living Faith Church.
Shiloh 2025, breaking new ground, time to break new ground. Amen.
This year's Shiloh was expected to follow the usual pattern of worship, teaching, and impartation, but something else captured nationwide attention. A dramatic shift occurred on the altar, and it has sparked intense conversations across social media, church circles, and the broader Christian community. During one of the services, Bishop David Oyedepo introduced his first son, Pastor David Oyedepo Jr., in a manner that many described as unusual, deliberate, and symbolically powerful.
When your life becomes a seed unto God, it imparts on your generations. It's my joy this morning to bring up for the next world my first son. Amen. We've never had any trouble saying our natural seed walk with Jesus.
This introduction was not a casual mention. It was done in a way that suggested a transition of weight, authority, and institutional positioning. For many observers, that moment was more than a father simply recognizing his son. It appeared to be a public affirmation of the next phase of leadership within the Living Faith Church. However, what intensified the public reaction was not just the introduction itself, but the noticeable absence of a man whose presence has been central to Shiloh for decades, Bishop David Abioye. For the first time in many years, the familiar voice and presence of Bishop Abioye were missing at Shiloh. His seat, his energy, and his influence were nowhere to be seen throughout the event. This absence instantly became a major conversation, because Abioye has always been recognized as the second-in-command within the ministry, a founding figure, and one of the closest men to Bishop Oyedepo since the beginning of the church. The silence surrounding his absence created a vacuum that allowed speculations to spread, and within hours, narratives began to take shape across online platforms. People began asking questions about what was happening behind the scenes. Was this absence intentional? Was something shifting in the leadership structure? Was this connected to earlier events in 2024? Gradually, the story expanded beyond Shiloh and became a discussion about succession, power, loyalty, and the politics of church leadership in Nigeria. Shiloh 2025, therefore, became more than a spiritual program. It became a window through which many began to examine the deeper dynamics at play within one of Africa's largest Pentecostal movements. And at the center of the storm is the evolving relationship between Bishop David Oyedepo, his long-standing deputy, Bishop David Abioye, and his first son, Pastor Oyedepo Jr. The introduction of Oyedepo Jr. and the absence of Abioye set the tone for broader questions that many had been asking since 2024, and it opened the door for a much larger historical and political conversation. Background: the 2024 retirement ceremony.
To me, adventure in ministry was not a subject of being desirous or having an ambition, but simply fulfilling divine purpose. Coming from an humble background.
To fully understand the drama surrounding Shiloh 2025, one must return to October 2024, when the Living Faith Church marked a major milestone, the 70th birthday celebration of Bishop David Oyedepo. What should have been a simple celebration of life and ministry quickly became a turning point in the leadership history of the church. During the event, two of the most prominent and oldest serving bishops in the ministry were officially retired. These were Bishop David Abioye and Bishop Thomas Aremu. Their retirement did not go unnoticed, and immediately, it became a topic of deep analysis within church circles. For over 4 decades, both men had served alongside Bishop Oyedepo with unwavering dedication. But Abioye's role stood out in particular. He was widely known as the closest man to Oyedepo from the very early stages of the ministry. In fact, many accounts suggest that Abioye joined Oyedepo in ministry when he was still a teenager or in his early 20s. He grew with the church from the foundation level, worked closely in building the doctrines, and eventually became the senior pastor of the Goshen branch in Abuja, one of the largest and most influential branches of the Living Faith Church worldwide. His influence was immense. He was not only a preacher but a respected father figure within the ministry, a man known for wisdom, calm leadership, and uncompromising loyalty to the founder. Bishop Thomas Aremu, on the other hand, had also served faithfully for many years. He was known for his pastoral strength, administrative discipline, and strong doctrinal consistency. Both men represented continuity, stability, and senior leadership in Living Faith Church. Their sudden retirement, especially when announced during such a symbolic moment as Bishop Oyedepo's 70th birthday celebration, raised immediate questions. Why retire them at the same time? Why retire the two most senior figures directly under the founder? Why was the timing so closely tied to Oyedepo's own milestone age? Members of the church attempted to treat it as a normal organizational decision, but observers outside the church saw something deeper. They pointed to the idea that when a founder clocks 70, thoughts about succession naturally rise. In many global ministries, reaching the age of 70 typically initiates discussions about future leadership and the transition of authority, even when such conversations are not openly stated. So the fact that two of the most senior leaders were retired at the very moment the founder was celebrating 70 was interpreted by some as a planned restructuring. But the shock did not end there. Immediately after the retirement, many noticed that both Abio and Aramu were absent from Shiloh 2024, which held later that same year. This was unprecedented. For decades, their voices and presence had been integral parts of Shiloh. Their absence raised eyebrows, and it seemed to confirm that something fundamental had shifted within the leadership arrangement of the church. The retirement of these two key figures, especially Abioye, who was seen as the natural institutional stabilizer of the church, laid the foundation for the wave of speculation that swept across 2025. It also provided the context through which many interpreted the dramatic events of Shiloh 2025. Speculations after the retirement. Immediately after the retirement in 2024, theories began circulating widely. Many believed that the move was strategic rather than administrative. One of the most dominant narratives was that Bishop Oyedepo was intentionally clearing the path for his first son, Pastor David Oyedepo Jr., to take over the central leadership of Living Faith Church. This speculation grew stronger when Oyedepo Jr. was appointed to pastor the headquarters in Canaanland, an appointment that many saw as symbolic and prophetic. For close watchers of church leadership patterns in Nigeria, such positioning usually signals succession. The idea that the founder wanted to ensure a smooth transition to his son gained traction, and people began connecting the dots. If a founder wants a seamless transfer of authority, he would likely want to make sure that no other highly influential leader stands between him and his son. In this case, Bishop Abioye was the most influential leader after the founder. He had served the longest. He had the strongest relationship with the founder. He had the deepest influence on the system and on the members. Many also saw him as the most capable successor if the church wanted leadership based purely on seniority, experience, or historical contribution. This perception created a tension point. If Abioye was not the founder's preferred successor, then his presence in the leadership structure could make the transition more complicated. People started suggesting that retiring him was a way to remove that possibility. These interpretations, whether accurate or not, became widespread and persistent. Within the Living Faith community, debates intensified. Some defended the founder's decision, insisting that retirement was normal and long overdue. Others believed that something deeper was at play. Online discussions turned into large debates on Facebook, YouTube, X, and WhatsApp groups. Past members, observers, and even critics of Nigerian Pentecostal leadership models weighed in. Many compared the situation with patterns in other major churches where leadership had shifted from father to son, sometimes smoothly, other times contentiously. Among all the voices, one point stood out repeatedly. Why did Bishop Abioye's retirement draw more attention than Aramu's? The reasons were clear. Abioye had significantly more influence. He had a stronger emotional connection with members. His loyalty to Oyedepo was almost legendary. He was seen as the voice of stability within Living Faith Church. He represented decades of history and sacrifice. Many believed that retiring him meant uprooting a major pillar in the church. His retirement was therefore not just administrative, it was symbolic. And his decision to start his own ministry, Living Word Conquerors Global Assembly, only intensified the narrative.
On this final note, and to the glory of God, this assembly with the name Living Word Conquerors Global Assembly is hereby inaugurated this day, Sunday, 4th May 2025.
For many observers, that move confirmed that the separation between him and the Living Faith Church system was not temporary. It was a permanent shift. These speculations continued to grow until Shiloh 2025 arrived, and the absence of Abioye, combined with the strategic introduction of Oyedepo Jr., breathed new life into the narrative that had been building for over a year. Post-retirement developments. Bishop Abioye. After the 2024 retirement ceremony, one of the most decisive moves came from Bishop David Abioye. While many expected him to remain quietly within the Living Faith Church system, perhaps as an elder statesman or consultant, Abioye took a different path. He launched his own ministry known as Living Word Conquerors Global Assembly.
On this final note, and to the glory of God, this assembly with the name Living Word Conquerors Global Assembly is hereby inaugurated this day, Sunday, 4th May 2025.
This was not a small step. It was a symbolic declaration of independence. For a man who had served under Bishop Oyedepo for more than 4 decades, and who had been regarded as the closest partner in the ministry's early days, starting a new ministry immediately signaled that the separation might be deeper than people imagined. Observers interpreted this move in several ways. Some believed that Abioye simply wanted to continue ministry work actively since retirement did not align with his personality or calling. Others saw it as a strategic repositioning, perhaps triggered by internal dynamics. But for many, the creation of Living Word Conquerors Global Assembly was the strongest indicator that reconciliation at institutional leadership level might not occur anytime soon. His new ministry began to attract attention quickly. Some former Living Faith members gravitated towards him, feeling a strong personal bond. His teachings continued, his following remained solid, and it was clear that he still commanded influence. This made his absence from subsequent Living Faith programs even more significant, because his new ministry stood as proof that his role within the Living Faith structure had concluded. Bishop Aremu. On the other side of the story, Bishop Thomas Aremu took a very different path after retirement. Instead of branching out to start a new ministry, he remained quietly within the Living Faith family.
And those that be planted in the house of the Lord will still bring forth fruit even in old age, even after retirement. I don't have a church, and I cannot have a church, because God has not infused me with the capacity to do so. This is my church. Even after retirement, I shall remain in the winner's family. I may be privileged to bless other churches other than winners, but there's nothing I'm going to teach them also than what I've learned in winner.
His posture was peaceful, respectful, and deeply loyal. That loyalty was later rewarded when he was recalled to pastor the Living Faith Church branch in Ibadan. His return surprised many, because it contradicted the typical understanding of retirement. Instead of stepping aside permanently, he was brought back into leadership. Some interpreted this as a sign that Aremu was not being removed but rather repositioned. Others believed that his loyalty made it easy for the leadership to bring him back into the system in a renewed pastoral role. However, the contrast between Aremu and Abioye was striking. While Abioye moved on to birth a new ministry, Aremu stayed within the structure, continuing his service. This difference became central to later interpretations of Shiloh 2025. In the eyes of many observers, Aremu was not removed. He was recycled. He was reassigned. He was valued. But Abioye, on the other hand, seemed to have been released completely, intentionally or otherwise. These post-retirement developments formed the backdrop for what would unfold during Shiloh 2025 and heavily influenced how people interpreted the events that followed. Shiloh 2025. The turning point. Shiloh 2025 emerged as one of the most defining moments in the recent history of the Living Faith Church. The atmosphere was charged with expectation as usual, but beneath the worship and the teachings, there was an undercurrent of silent curiosity. People wanted to see how the leadership dynamics would manifest on the Shiloh altar. And very early into the event, a significant moment occurred. Bishop David Oyedepo introduced Pastor David Oyedepo Jr. in a distinctly unusual manner. This was not the typical acknowledgement of a pastor. This was a public elevation, a symbolic announcement, and a spiritual endorsement all wrapped into one. The presentation of Oyedepo Jr. carried weight. It signaled that the founder was intentionally placing his son at the center of the movement. The words, tone, and posture of that introduction set the internet on fire, because watchers quickly connected the dots between this moment and the events of the previous year. People concluded that what happened in 2024 was part of a broader succession plan. The founder was gradually bringing his son into the highest seat of influence, preparing the movement for the future. This moment became the turning point. Then came another defining observation. Bishop Abioye, once the second most visible face at Shiloh, was completely absent. His absence was not just noticed, it was loud. It was symbolic. It carried meaning. For decades, he had played a central role on the Shiloh altar. Now, in this pivotal year, he was noticeably missing. His absence cast a shadow over the event and intensified ongoing speculation. For many people, Abioye's absence confirmed the narrative that something deeper had occurred between him and the founder, something strong enough to create a clear separation. But another surprise soon followed. Bishop Thomas Aremu, who was retired alongside Abioye in 2024, was called upon to preach during Shiloh 2025.
I also deliver this word of life in this holy assembly, and I'm not taking it for granted. I appreciate my Father in the Lord for this privilege.
This shocked many observers. If a man was retired, why was he preaching again on the biggest platform of the ministry? Why was the same courtesy not extended to Abioye? Why was Aramu restored publicly while Abioye remained outside the system? This contrast intensified public curiosity and made the absence of Abioye even more noticeable. The fact that Aramu was allowed to return to the altar, while Abioye was not present at all, spoke volumes. It suggested a deliberate distinction between the treatment of the two retired bishops. It suggested that one was brought back into the fold while the other remained completely away. Whether intentional or not, this sent a message to the global audience watching Shiloh 2025, and that message became the foundation of the controversies that erupted afterward. Public reactions and controversies. As Shiloh 2025 continued, social media erupted with intense reactions. People began to draw conclusions, analyze patterns, and debate the motives behind the events of the past 2 years. Several theories began to dominate the discussion. The first theory was that the 2024 retirement was primarily targeted at Bishop Abioye. According to this perspective, removing both Abioye and Aramu at once was simply a way of disguising the true intention. By retiring them together, it appeared neutral, but the events that followed revealed that the real aim was to shift Abioye out of the picture, not necessarily Aramu. Another theory, widely circulated online, suggested that Bishop Oyedepo was strategically arranging a smooth succession pathway for his son. This argument pointed to the introduction of Oyedepo Jr. at Shiloh 2025, his increasingly visible role, and his position as the pastor of the headquarters church. Supporters of this theory argued that having Abioye still at the center of the system could complicate such a transition, given his decades of influence, respect, and foundational connection to the ministry. A third theory claimed that Abioye had become too powerful within Living Faith Church. His influence was deep. His following was strong. Many people were drawn to him for his humility, consistency, and spiritual authority. Some believed that such influence could overshadow the founder's succession plans. By retiring him, the leadership structure could be reshaped without the complication of his presence. Then came the symbolic interpretation of Shiloh 2025. Observers pointed to 3 major symbolic signals. First, Oyedepo Jr. was placed at the center of attention. Second, Bishop Aremu was restored publicly, symbolizing that he was still in alignment with the founder's plans. And third, Abioye was absent, which many interpreted as a clear message that his journey with Living Faith Church had reached its final chapter. This 3-part symbolism formed the core of online debates. Commentators argued that the contrast between Aramu's return and Abioye's absence revealed everything the leadership was not saying publicly. They connected this contrast to the succession theory, suggesting that Abioye's separation was necessary in order to give clear space for the next generation of leadership under Oyedepo Jr. Videos, posts, and discussions flooded digital platforms as Nigerians, Christians, and church analysts tried to decode the events. While the Living Faith Church has not released any official position on these matters, the combination of retirement, separation, recall, introduction, and absence has created one of the most complex leadership narratives within Nigerian Pentecostalism in recent years. The controversies remain unresolved, and the interpretations continue to evolve as new developments unfold. What is clear is that Shiloh 2025 will be remembered as the moment when quiet speculation turned into open national conversation about succession, loyalty, and leadership strategy within one of Africa's largest churches. Succession politics in Nigerian churches. To understand the events unfolding within the Living Faith Church, it is important to step back and observe the broader landscape of church leadership succession in Nigeria. The Nigerian Pentecostal space is one of the most dynamic religious ecosystems in the world. Churches are not just spiritual communities, they are large institutions with global membership, multi-million-dollar infrastructures, and complex internal hierarchies. Because of this scale, succession becomes a critical topic that is often surrounded by caution, speculation, and controversy. One of the recurring patterns in Nigerian churches is the rise of dynastic transitions. This refers to leadership passing from father to son or staying within the founder's family. For many ministries, the rationale is to preserve the original vision, protect institutional assets, and maintain continuity. Examples exist across the country, where sons or close relatives of founders eventually take prominent roles or assume leadership after the founders retire or pass on. The conversation becomes more intense when comparing Living Faith Church to other mega-churches. In many of these ministries, there is a gradual grooming process where the founders' children are introduced to the congregation through teaching roles, youth ministries, or leadership positions. Over time, they become more visible. Their voices become familiar. Their presence becomes accepted. It is a long-term transition model, and for some churches, it has worked smoothly. For others, it has triggered internal tension, splits, or quiet realignments. In the case of the Living Faith Church, the rise of Pastor David Oyedepo Jr. fits within this larger national pattern. He has been in ministry for years, but in recent times, his prominence has increased significantly. His appointment as the pastor of the headquarters church, his exposure during major services, and the deliberate way he was introduced during Shiloh 2025 indicate that the process has reached a critical stage. Observers note that the dynamics surrounding the retirement of senior bishops, particularly someone as foundational as Bishop Abioye, should be viewed within this broader context. The succession politics of Nigerian churches often require careful balancing of legacy, loyalty, and generational transition, and Shiloh 2025 seems to reflect this delicate balance unfolding in real time. What this means for the future of Living Faith Church. As Shiloh 2025 continues to be analyzed, one of the key questions is what these developments mean for the future of the Living Faith Church. The first major point is the consolidation of leadership by Pastor David Oyedepo Jr., who now stands as the pastor of the Canaanland headquarters. This position is the most strategic pastoral seat in the entire ministry. It is the international headquarters, the center of global broadcasts, and the symbolic heart of the church. That seat has historically been a place of enormous spiritual and administrative authority. With Oyedepo Jr. occupying it, an important foundation for future leadership has already been set. Behind the scenes, observers believe that a restructuring of power is taking place. The retirement of older bishops, the reabsorption of Bishop Aremu, and the absence of Bishop Abioye all point toward shifting authority lines. The founder appears to be ensuring that the next generation of leadership aligns completely with the long-term vision of the ministry. Power in megachurch structures is not only spiritual, it is administrative, financial, and doctrinal. That means the positioning of key figures greatly influences the direction of the ministry over the next decade. The departure of Bishop Abioye introduces another layer of complexity. Abioye was not just a senior bishop, he was a foundational pillar. His absence creates a vacuum in the collective identity of many members who grew under his teachings. The long-term impact of this absence may manifest in three ways. First, in the internal culture of the church. He represented stability, humility, and depth for many loyalists. Second, in the spiritual atmosphere of major programs where he had been a recurring figure. Third, in public perception, because the continuing contrast between Aramu's restoration and Abioye's separation will shape how observers interpret the church's leadership philosophy. For unity, the church will need to ensure that internal transitions do not create silent camps. The Nigerian Christian community is watching closely, analyzing each decision through the lens of loyalty, succession, and long-term vision. Living Faith Church remains a global force with millions of followers, and these developments could either strengthen its structure or create subtle tensions if not well managed. In terms of influence, the introduction of Oyedepo Jr. as a central figure signals the emergence of a new generation within the church. This may attract younger members and modernize the ministry's messaging. However, it also places a heavy responsibility on him to meet expectations set over the last 4 decades by his father and by leaders like Abioye. The future of the church will depend on how well this generational shift is balanced with the need to maintain stability, spiritual focus, and doctrinal consistency. In the end, Shiloh 2025 has done more than fulfill its spiritual mandate. It has revealed layers of institutional strategy, leadership calibration, and internal restructuring that few expected to see so clearly this year. Whether planned or coincidental, the sequence of events from the retirement ceremony in 2024 to the symbolic moments of Shiloh 2025 points toward a strategic reshaping of the Living Faith Church's leadership landscape. The reappearance of Bishop Aremu on the Shiloh altar, the prominent unveiling of Oyedepo Jr., and the conspicuous absence of Bishop Abioye all form a narrative that is shaping discussions across Nigeria's Christian space. Some see it as succession planning. Others view it as internal politics. Some believe it is purely spiritual alignment. But regardless of individual interpretation, the developments signal a turning point in how the church is positioning itself for the next phase. The story is far from over. With a founder still active, a new generation rising, and former leaders charting their own paths, the future chapters of this unfolding narrative will continue to attract attention. Nigerian Christians, church analysts, and observers across the continent are watching closely to see what comes next. What is certain is that this moment will be remembered as a defining period in the life of the Living Faith Church. A moment where transitions became visible, decisions became symbolic, and the direction of one of Africa's largest churches began to shift quietly but powerfully into a new era.